Hello, everyone. My name is Juju Chang, and I work for ABC News Nightline, and I am thrilled to be here with you at the World Science Festival. This afternoon, our panel is called Sense and Sensibility, the Secret Language of Smell, because we're very literary, sense and sensibility. I hope you received that envelope that Tracy mentioned. I want you to not pull it out yet. Don't pull out any of them, and don't take any of the plastic wraps off, because we're going to have a little fun with them a little bit later in the panel. And we're going to ask you to take them out and smell them and do all these fun things. But for now, I want you to, because I know it's a long afternoon and because we have an hour and a half of fun for you, I want you to stand up, stretch your legs, and on the count of 3, take in a big breath, because this is about smell, okay? 1, 2, 3. Exhale. I feel like a yoga teacher. Actually, with this earpiece, I feel like Lady Gaga. But what you might have smelled is perhaps your own perfume, perhaps your neighbor's perfume, perhaps your neighbor's pheromones. You never know. But in fact, you've inhaled thousands of odor molecules. You can sit all down now. The odor molecules come from your hands or whatever's around you, the last thing you touched, perhaps from your clothes, even from the seat you're sitting in, and from whoever sat there last. The people sitting around you, their clothes, the places they've traveled throughout the day. It's a long list, but you may not have been conscious of smelling anything, because olfaction is a part of the subconscious, which brings us to the secret language of smell and all of the encoded information contained in a scent.
The most primal of our senses, the most evocative,
the smell of fresh cut grass takes me back to my childhood in the summertime. I get a sense of overwhelming freedom and a total lack of responsibility.
Smell is the only human sense that brings floating molecules from our environment into direct contact with our neurons.
The smell of lemons makes me feel like a little girl again. My mother used to rinse my hair with lemon juice. Makes me feel very loved.
And when those molecules hit, they light up our brain's centers of communication, memory, emotion.
I cannot smell cigar smoke without thinking of my dad. Even though my dad hasn't smoked a cigar in about 30 years, it always makes me think of him.
The images you're seeing are not abstract psychedelic art. They're the olfactory neurons of mice reacting to an odor. Our olfactory systems work in much the same way.
I think for me, the smell of a wood-burning fire reminds me of coming home from school as the winter's approaching in England. My mother was toasting crumpets. It was fantastic.
Tonight, we'll look at why our sense of smell provokes such powerful memories, and we'll explore these questions too. Can scent be used to diagnose disease? What does fear smell like? Do we respond to scents we're not even conscious of? Chemists, neuroscientists, even perfumers have startling new answers about the power of smell.
It's a lot to cover in about an hour and a half, and it's a lot of fun, too. And so here to provide some of the answers are Dr. Leslie Vosshall. She's a neuroscientist at Rockefeller University who's leading the charge in studying olfaction's role in the brain and human behavior. Also joining me is Dr. Consuelo de Moraes. She's a chemical ecologist from Penn State University, where she studies the complex airborne communication among plants. She's currently applying what she's learned to humans with funding from the Gates Foundation to create an electronic nose. She will tell you about this in a minute. Next, we have a self-described professional provocateur. Sissel Tolis is a researcher and artist who works in the medium of smell. She's traveled the world amassing her own diary of smells. Her many projects include recreating the smells of Paris and Berlin. And rounding out our panel is Dr. Avery Gilbert. He's a sensory psychologist who's been called the Mark Twain, very literary, of the nasal passages. His projects include everything from the designing scents for kitty litter to creating technology to bring the sense of smell to the internet. He's the author of What the Nose Knows. So I've decided that because of Avery, we have the sexiest panel on the World Science Festival. Avery, tell me a little bit about how scent is different than sight and how it's different from the other senses.
It's different because we know, until very recently, very little about it scientifically, but also because it's the surprising sense. I think what we'll hear about a couple of times today is that you can be walking through the street, you hit a plume of odor, and suddenly you're transported to a different time and a different place, very vividly, with very accurate emotional recall. And I think that's something that people have commented on for a long, long time. And we can now understand the kind of the neuroanatomy and the brain chemistry of that goes on. That's one big way.
And do you want to talk about how the genes detect all these colors and vision as well?
I'm going to leave that to Leslie because that's her
You're going to do
expertise.
that, okay.
That's my job.
Trying to get me to step on Leslie's lines. I won't do it.
So what I think we
I've
have to
learned the hard way.
recognize is that the sense of smell, it's a very old sense, but we've only really studied it in earnest in the last 20 years. So people have had a very little idea since about 1991 about how it works. But I think it's instructive to think about how vision works. And so it's amazing what we can do with just 3 proteins in our eyes. So to look at an image of violets, a typical human can see about 10 million colors. And so you can see in this image, you have the richness of textures of color. So how does this work? So we know from much older work than 20 years ago that with just 3 genes, a red gene, a green gene, and a blue gene, the eye and the brain can decompose 10 million colors. And so it's the coding potential of just 3 genes to see 10 million things is really extraordinary. And we know that this is important because if you're missing one of the genes, it's an extremely common genetic disease in men to be missing the green gene. So one of the photoreceptor genes drops out, and then you have red-green color blindness, and that very much diminishes the sense of how vision works. So how does this all relate to the sense of smell?
Right.
Where am I going with this? You guys didn't pay $30 to hear me talk about vision. So how it relates to smell is that since 1991, we know that the human nose has 400 receptors. And so you can kind of do the math. If you can see 10 million things with 3 genes, what can you do with 400 genes? And I think Avery and I can discuss how many scents there are. It's kind of an unknown number, how many scents there are. But if you imagine the nose containing 400 different genes that can grab onto scents from the environment, if we draw those as 400 little circles. So if you imagine that, if you're looking at this picture, the nose doesn't really look like this, but if you imagine each of those little circles is a gene that's expressed in your nose, if you're smelling nothing, if you're just smelling clean air, the circles would all be white and you would sense nothing. But if you inhale a bit of jasmine, you might start activating some of those receptors. Some of the receptors would be really excited by jasmine, and they would be depicted here in dark blue, and other ones would be depicted in light blue. So then what happens if you have now more jasmine, so the scent changes a little bit. You know that in some cases, something you can smell weak and then strong, and so you see you recruit more of these receptors, and in some cases that can give you a bit of an unpleasant tinge if you're really activating a lot of receptors.
Leslie, why is it that smelling is the particular scent that it seems to be the same experience for everyone?
So that's not the case for most things. So people have a very individual sense of what I consider a strong scent or a weak scent will differ a great deal depending on these receptors, so depending on how many of them you have and what the genetic constitution of the receptors is. So people differ. They have great differences of opinion about if something smells good or bad or weak or strong.
And is that based on your genes or your cultural
So we think it
background,
comes down to the 400 circles that are cartooned here. Science will say that it has a strong effect on how you sense things. So if you're missing one of the 400 receptors, that's really essential for encoding the perceptive jasmine. Jasmine would smell very different. So the genes play a big role, but environment, of course, also plays a huge role in, so prior experience, your memory of these scents will play a huge role, as the beginning video made a very good point. That
Right, and these scents come in direct contact with our neurons, which I think is fascinating.
it's the only, it's a kind of a creepy thing that it's the only part of the brain that sits outside of the skull. So the neurons that are sitting in your nose are, it's a little bit of your brain that's fallen out of the, out of the covering of the brain.
My brain has fallen. Excellent. All right, well, Consuelo, why don't you advance the discussion a little bit? I know that you've done really trailblazing work on this sort of invisible language of plants. And I think most people may not know that a plant can send out a scent at a particular moment for a particular purpose.
Right, so I think a lot of people know that plants can defend themselves by producing toxins. So we're very familiar with some of those, like caffeine, cocaine, nicotine, right? So these are plant defenses. But a lot of people don't know that when plants are attacked, they also can have those indirect defenses. So what they do is they, if you can show the video a little bit, they will, when the caterpillars are feeding on the plants will induce, those caterpillars will induce the plants to produce those volatiles. And this is just a representation of the volatiles. Obviously, you don't see them. And they will send the scent that natural enemies can utilize to find their host or their prey. So these are parasitoid wasps. So they perceive the volatiles, and what they do, and you'll see here in a minute, they will inject the egg inside those caterpillars, and the egg will emerge. We eat the caterpillar from the inside out. And eventually, if you've seen the movie Aliens, very much that, right? They will come out and as a new parasitoid. So it's a way to do biological control. And this volatiles information is very, very sophisticated. So if you have one caterpillar species feeding on a plant, they will produce a set of signals. If you have a different caterpillar species, you produce a different set of signals. And the wasp can find their host basically on what the plant's producing. So.
That's fascinating. And so, Leslie, let me go back to you for a second, because I think we skipped over sort of how this all works. How is it that a nose detects scents and get to sort of, the idea of vanilla versus jasmine?
So the magic of the sense of smell is that it's a chemical sense. You have to, if you ask someone to smell something, they'll typically close their eyes and you have to take a breath in, and so then you're bringing chemicals into your nose, and you have this big array of proteins that are able to bind to those smell molecules in different ways. And so you can imagine if you have 400 options, and each of them can bind to a combination of different scents, the coding potential, the number of different smells that you can encode with the system is huge, is vast, is sort of uncountable, which is really convenient because we don't know what scents we might encounter in the future. So the human nose is prepared for virtually any scent. And so if you get on a plane and travel to another part of the world, you don't have to learn to detect those things. You can encounter completely unfamiliar scents because you're endowed with this huge set of chemical detectors. And there's some overlap in the code. So there's some overlap in vanilla, so you may activate some of the same receptors with the scent of vanilla and the scent of jasmine. But it can also get really complicated. They can start canceling each other out. So when you start mixing things together, which is what perfumers do, things can become very unpredictable. So there's been good experiments showing that if I train each of you to smell jasmine or vanilla or something like wintergreen, you can learn to distinguish those. Once I start mixing them together, people are completely stumped.
It's like my Joe Malone lime mandarin orange lotion.
Thank God she didn't go beyond 3, because once you go beyond 3 components, people are completely stumped because the 400 receptors start interacting, and something, it will be like A plus B will produce Z, so a completely different percept emerges, which is why perfumery ends up being so empirical and so artistic, because you can predict what colors, you guys have all mixed colors together, you can predict what you'll get if you mix 2 colors. You actually can't predict what will happen if you mix 2 smells.
Fascinating, all right. Consuelo, did you get to this idea that when an insect is under attack, they send out different signals?
So the plants, when the plants are under attack, actually the way we found that out was I was in the field and I was supposed to have a set of caterpillars.
Right.
But ended up that day I didn't have that caterpillar. And people thought, oh, all caterpillars will produce the same kind of, induce the plant to produce the same kind of signal. And then I was in the field and I had all these insects, but the wasps only would come to the plants that had the right caterpillar.
Right.
So then we went and looked at it, the chemistry that the plant was producing, and realized there are two sets of signals that are being produced, not only. So I think the fascinating thing about this is that the plants are producing a signal that can tell you that the plants are being attacked, but also by whom they're being attacked, and I think that's amazing.
That is fascinating.
They're crying out, they're calling help, but in different, but they're providing information about what's attacking them.
It's the opposite of a skunk. I guess it's like a skunk, right? So Sissel, tell us a little bit about what brought you into this field. You've combined chemistry and linguistics and art.
To continue where you stopped there, I was trying to become a skunk. Why not try to use smell for that kind of purpose? Leave me alone kind of purpose, that of thing. Come to me. Anyway, yes, you are sanitized and pasteurized for your protection in the society we live in, meaning the antiseptic death and the fact that not all smells can be pleasant, we will end up having none at all. So I decided to maybe take care of those ones who have no right. And started collaborate with the industry who have the knowledge. There are about 5 big players who control everything what has to do with smell and taste in the entire planet.
You've clearly done a lot of
yes,
smelling.
And what they primarily do is to camouflage, deodorize, and perfumerize reality. And I said, okay, maybe I should show the same reality before they come and do their job. So with the same knowledge, I started to do field work.
You started to collect
Yes.
scent specimens, up to like 7,000, right?
Yes. So that was my starting point to check out if I can use my nose for other purposes, just breathing in and out. Can my nose be used purpose communication, navigation, decision-making, education, and so on and so forth? Can I be able to reproduce the smell that's around me full time, bring it back to the same reality, ask questions? Could we use this kind of information for different purposes? Then just storing it in our memory and using maximum 20% of all these amazing smell memories that's stored in the subconsciousness.
Well, Sissel talks about scent and behavior, and so Avery, I want you to talk a little bit about picking up on what Consuelo was saying, that these plants send off an odor under attack. If plants use a scent for survival, is that what humans have to do as well? And why do we have this sense from this sort of evolutionary perspective?
There was a great paper that just came out in Science this past week. I don't know if you all saw it. Timothy Rowe at the University of Texas. This fellow looked back at it's like 600 million-year-old fossils of the first kind of lizardoids that were becoming mammals in an early stage. And there were a couple of different stages in this evolution, and each stage was characterized by an enormous increase in the olfactory bulbs, which are where your olfactory nerves go up into your head, and they're the first relay center in the brain that does a lot of the analysis in making all making this chemical profile into a perception of jasmine, say. So the bulbs got bigger, and the processing areas for smell in the primary cortex got bigger. We're talking about animals that were this big. These are Chinese fossils. And then hundreds of million years later, there was another burst of evolution, and the bulbs got bigger yet, and the brain areas got bigger yet. And Rowe has a very interesting theory about it. He says what this did, and it was also happening with the development of hair on the exterior, and the brain areas that could interpret the movement of hairs. So if the breeze is blowing past you, or if you're being touched or rubbed or something like this, hairs became sensory, not just a thermal blanket. So he says what happened was this was enormously increasing our potential awareness of the environment as our ancestors' awareness of the environment, and it was smell and this kind of general ability to pick up any of the, with 400 receptor types like Leslie was talking about, we've got this enormous array to detect the world, whereas insects, a gross generalization, but insects are kind of finely tuned to pick up, the mating smell, the right caterpillars you like to eat or lay eggs in or whatever you do.
Right.
It's a little creepy. there are other movies, but...
One thing that I think actually is amazing is that, so when we look at those wasps and how they find the caterpillars, you put them in this very complex environment, right, that have several plants. Many times they are generalists. They eat several types of plants. And in that mass of smell, they can find exactly what they're looking for. And it's shocking to me every time.
That's a very cool thing, because I mean, if you think about what the atmosphere is in a, let's say, a field with wasps and caterpillars, it's a chemical soup of all different kinds of stuff, put up there intentionally and unintentionally. And that insect is looking for a particular little combination of this and that and this. Right. And so it's what psychologists have a term in hearing perception. It's called the cocktail party phenomenon. You're in a cocktail party and you're listening to that couple over there have an argument, not these 500 other couples. You can tune in one particular conversation, even though if you look at the sonic energy profile of the cocktail party, it's just a huge mishmash. But our brain does a signal processing task very well where we pick that out. So I guess in general insects, I'm not trying to put the insects down, but they're focused on a very particular conversation between a screaming caterpillar, or between a screaming plant and an eating caterpillar. And the wasp says, let's go.
Well, Sissel has go ahead.
But I think also that human being can, one stage, be able to do this. I've been trying, and a certain situation, I'm able to identify the smell in the cocktail, and I think it's just a different kind of programming, a different kind of focus. If you just, primary navigate and communicate and decide by vision. If you just let looking have a break and concentrate that the nose is doing the job here. I mean,
I'm usually good at picking up sort of the smell of cupcakes. That's how I navigate around.
But
I also find that, I love your research project where you break down the scent, for example, in a jacket. I've always thought, sort of after a night of Korean barbecue that, oof, I can smell it. You've actually broken it down chemically.
So I was invited to do a project in south of France. The south of France is famous for their natural smells and their amazing relation to perfumery and the like, and I wanted to kind of try to move this knowledge, or provoke that kind of knowledge of a kind. And the fact is, we communicate smell in our society to perfume ads. Marketing took over where science left. And I tried to bring back a little bit science to reality and say, listen, I mean, okay, Chanel can do a good job and cover up a lot of things, but I mean, if you want to know what's actually happening, I would like to show you. So the next slide, please. So I headspace the garments from Citizen of Montpellier, and these are just some of the smells I found in the garments. Of course, there are much more molecules than I'm able to identify, but I wanted to give a kind of feedback to the owners and say, listen, this is what you're carrying around. I can even smell you have a lover. This person had a lover using background Jill Sander. And she was suing Chanel and saying, listen, this is what happened. I thought I used your product because it should cover up that I don't have all this other smell. So again, it's like letting people have access to what's actually happening. You're carrying around smell molecules from the surrounding you live in, the people you're trafficking with, or whatever. That is just a reality. And none of these codes went back to the owners. I have them all.
You've also picked up on the scent of fear.
Yes.
And tell us about that project.
Yes, in 2006, I was commissioned by MIT to do a project about new technology and the senses. And I was curious, next slide, please. And I was curious, could I smell fear? This was in the period of the Bush government and the whole notion of paranoia and terror. And I was thinking, am I able to smell that people are afraid? So I got access to a lot of phobic men that really was suffering from severe phobia towards others. And to make a long story short, I started collect their sweat at moments of a fear attack, and we had spaced it. And of course, there are more molecules in the body that I'm able to reproduce in chemistry. But nevertheless, this is a reality, and being able to reproduce reality and project it a non-reality, next slide, please,
So what was the
make people
dropout rate?
understand.
What was the dropout rate once you told the people in the research that you were going to smell the armpit of a man?
No, they didn't know. So, of course, the men, they had only numbers, so it's all in comedy. I was only interested in the sweat, and we did a lot of comparison of the sweat. So this is the China version. It's the Beijing Olympics. There were 31 guys lined up, and you only activate the smell by touching the wall, so you get the sweat like
so the smell of fear is pasted
and
on
your
the walls.
your reaction is immediately. You know, the next slide shows that you know, it was all over, and this one was fascinating. I could smell armpit even downstairs. So
how do you put the smell of fear on the walls? That's what I want to know. You literally roll it with the roller?
No, this is reproduced as close as I could to the original, and then it's turned into the nanotechnology microencapsulation, which is a fantastic technology. I use the wall as a metaphor for the skin. So I bind the microencaps smell into a binder, paint the wall, and it's no image. You just touch the wall, and so wise it's released the smell, in this case, the different sweats.
My 3-year-old has trouble pronouncing words, but he would say that's degusting. But speaking of degusting, you have a research project making cheese from human bacteria?
Yes. So Harvard Medical School got curious about this notion of smell and bacteria, and because smell and bacteria are not always nice, as I said before, we will end up having none at all. So I was invited to do a research project with Christina Agapazzi from Harvard Medical School, and we decided to focus on the cheese as a metaphor for the human organism. And the fact is, the more smellier the cheese is, the better the cheese is. The more smellier the human body is, the more stinky it is or the bad it is. So we wanted to kind of see how can these two worlds meet, and what can we learn from it, and how can we train tolerance to one or the other by doing this experiment. So these are cheese, they're a bacteria from cheese, and we gave it to a lot of people to describe these smells. And here again, you see the reference to human body and to body smells. Next slide. So yeah, this is the cheese. Like inside the cheese, you have the more bacteria, the better the cheese, the more smelly the cheese. Next slide, please. Yeah, I'm crazy, yes. So, so on behalf of a long process, we decided to collect bacteria from human body. So there are armpit, there are nose, there are shoes, there are, you name it, I say it. And we got some raw milk from Vermont, which is like dealing drugs in the US. And to get the raw milk into Harvard was not so easy. So we got more or less under the table. And we started to make cheese with the different synthetic biologists. And the next slide, please. So these are the different cheeses. And one of these cheeses was eaten by the owner, and it was a very interesting reaction, you know.
As my 3-year-old would say, degusting. Avery, help me out here.
But what the point is really, by understanding like bacteria or bad smells, that are just something negative, the whole discussion of hedonic, this is an attempt to bring to a step further to understand and getting access to what actually happened. How can you use that kind of material for different
So I think, Leslie, the next time you have trouble getting somebody through a human subjects review committee for permission to do an experiment, just say, I'm an artist.
Exactly.
Back off, man.
So Avery, help me out here. This is clearly, I mean, from an evolutionary perspective, bad odors really repulse us.
Yeah. Yeah, people, this comes back to one issue, which is, are there naturally good or naturally bad odors, kind of universal disgust odors and so forth? To which my answer, I think, is that there are categories of odors that are bad in general. And, well, it's past the lunch hour, so I can talk about it. Urine odors, fecal odors, odors of disgust and of decay, for example, are things that most people find bad most of the time, whereas categories like floral, woody, grassy, herbaceous odors, fruity odors are generally regarded as nice. There's always exceptions. A narcissus flower, to me, smells like the inside of brand new tennis balls, and I don't like it. And there's exceptions the other way, where negative odors come to take on a very positive meaning, like French cheeses, for example. You know, I can blindfold you and have you smell something, and you, depending on what I tell you, you can believe it's either a fine French cheese or a full baby diaper.
Oh, interesting.
And it's kind of a toss-up.
So it's all in your mind?
Context does matter. But
Right.
so I think there are those general things, and there are these very specific cultural exceptions where, like natto, which is a fermented soybean. And
I had it for dinner the other night.
oh, yeah.
I love it, but it smells gross.
I bought some once and I could not choke it down. It's soybeans that get fermented into this sticky, gooey mass. So I bought some at an Asian market, brought it home in the car. It was in the wintertime. I picked it up, and the box was warm because it was so biologically active.
Can I tell you, I can only eat it when my nice Jewish husband is not home because he really objects to the odor of it. He really objects to it. So, yeah. But give us a sense. There's a lot of myths about scent. One of them, for example, happened to me when I was in London last week, and I was buying some room freshener, and the salesman said, "Here, let me cleanse your nose palate," and made me smell coffee. That's a myth, evidently.
This one drives me up a wall.
It's the most ludicrous.
The coffee bean thing, yeah. You get it in every fragrance counter in the world. As far as I can tell, it started back in the late 90s at a trade show, a perfume trade show, and putting a pile of beans that you come to this after sampling different colognes and perfumes, and this would clear your nose. Why? I mean, the typical Arabica medium roast coffee bean has over 800 different volatile molecules in it. So why that would particularly clear your nose is beyond me. There's a brand new paper where somebody looked at the effect of coffee beans and also fresh squeezed lemon as a way of kind of clearing one's senses between sensory judgment episodes, and there was no effect at all. In fact, nobody's ever shown that palate cleansers are real. I mean,
Right.
the French enjoy them in the restaurants. You can have the sherbet in between courses, but the effect on sensory judgments is unmeasurable. So
What about this idea that if you're blind, like the Helen Keller effect, if you're blind, you have a stronger sense of smell?
this one I get all the time. As soon as you tell somebody you work in fragrance, they tell you. You know that Helen Keller could really, really, really smell good. And it's like, who is her PR people? I know she's been. I think she died in '64, but this message goes on resoundingly.
You're shattering a legend. Another legend you're about to shatter is Proust. He is known to have discovered odor memory.
Yeah, he gets credit for two things. One is for being the first literary description of odor memory. Yeah, usually I set it up without the red X, but if he's given credit for describing it first, and for also being the first kind of scientific explanation of this, which is bogus in two different ways. People have been describing that snap-on, sudden, instantaneous flood of memory linked to smell for hundreds of years before. There are French antecedents. Edgar Allan Poe drew attention to the special connection of smell and memory back in the 18-teens. Oliver Wendell Holmes did it in 1851. 1858, we had Nathaniel Hawthorne in the House of Seven Gables talking about it. It's a very well-known thing. It was very much an idea in the air, so to speak, when Proust was writing his novel. Remembrance of Things Past, which was published in 1913, at least the first volume of this, if you want to start reading it. It's like 18 volumes.
Just to continue the intellectual takedown, we had a photo of Freud up, and you were going to claim that he made some false accusations about scent as well? That he claims that we don't pay attention to scents as adults.
Freud had a very negative view. Now I'm going to get into trouble because New York has more Freudian psychoanalysts per square kilometer than any other. So not with the vegetables yet.
I see tomatoes coming out.
Freud's idea was that that healthy, normal neurotics, as they grow up, dispense with the sense of smell. That only children, primitive people, and women are really into smell. And in his view, it became something dispensed with later, and that he thinks we have a poor sense of smell compared to animals. This turns out not to be true, first of all, because we are as sensitive in pure concentration terms of picking up smells as most other primates, and even as dogs, even when it comes to drug-type odors. And secondly, something I talked about in my book, when you look at Freud's own personal medical history, the guy had a major influenza. You can lose your sense of smell from having a severe flu. He had a severe flu in his 30s, which was so bad it left him with a heart arrhythmia. He had cancer of the jaw. He had migraine headaches that his friend Fleece tried to cure with injections of cocaine into his nasal passages.
Oh, my goodness.
Fleece also removed some of the lower turbinate bones from his nose. He had repeated nasal surgery. He smokes 20 cigars a day. he was a medical nightmare. By his early 30s, Freud was probably not smelling a thing, but he told everybody else, he assumed everybody else couldn't either. The amazing thing is that there's a Freudian term for that, and it's projection.
Right, exactly.
So,
I'm glad you got to the punchline. Now, I'm one of those people who, if you could blindfold me, I would tell you that this is my husband, I could smell him, I can smell my children. But you're saying that smells can actually identify people.
yeah, I'm very into body odor these days.
Nice. That's a good first line at a cocktail party.
Yeah, that'll clear your way to the hors d'oeuvre table very
Exactly.
easily. My original interest in smell was with animal behavior, and a lot of what animals do in their daily lives involves smell, scent marking, recognizing mates, mothers and infants, and so forth. It turns out almost all of those things that animals do, we're talking about mammals now, we can do. So mothers recognize the scent of their babies' clothes versus other babies. Babies can recognize their mother, a nursing mother's breast pad from other mothers. Men and women attract each other. We can tell by body smell if somebody's sexually mature. We can tell from women if they're cycling. Apparently we can tell from smell if strippers are ovulating.
Right. I mentioned that, and I want actually Leslie to weigh in because we were talking about the strippers.
She brought it up. I didn't. I'm not injecting this into the conversation.
Because this is the kind of mind I have, and I see a young man in the front, so close your ears right now, earmuffs right now. But there's a whole study out there about how strippers, when they're ovulating, get better tips.
This is my favorite scientific
So Leslie has to weigh in.
So the setting is New Mexico, and it was a carefully controlled study where strippers would log on to a website, report their tips, and also report where they were in their menstrual cycle.
Okay.
And they enrolled women who were taking oral contraceptives and therefore were sort of flatlined for hormones, and women who are naturally ovulating. And the results are really stunning. So women who are on the pill and don't ovulate have a very even tip trend. Those who are ovulating shoot up to a huge peak of profitability when they're ovulating, suggesting that they're much more attractive to their customers when they're ovulating, also suggesting that sort of subliminally the customers can tell.
Or perhaps they project more sexuality themselves when they're ovulating in attempt.
We've been thinking about how to reproduce this, but it gets into sort of ethical issues. How do you enroll? The ideal thing is to enroll non-strippers and look at hundreds of people.
Could you imagine being the research assistant on that one? Tell us about pheromones, though, Avery, because we all talk about, oh, he's got good pheromones, oh, he's attractive.
Here's where Avery and I will start choking each other.
This will be a takedown.
All right,
I've
become a convert to the non-pheromone school recently. Again, having said that, I think humans are able to make all these discriminations about who's related to them, the sex, age, health, even the emotional state of people. There's a lot of new work on that. You can tell from a person's sweat whether you can tell the anxious people versus people who are just sweating on a dance floor or on an exercise machine. So I think all that information is there. I think we are...
Really? Sweat smells different if you're working out than if you're on a dance floor?
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Athletic sweat is one thing, but if you're... athletics, so dance floor, gym, workout, that smells one way. If you've been stressed, and they take
Oh, got it.
Then that smells different. So the emotional state of the sweater, so to speak, makes a difference. All that we're communicating. I suspect that at a very at the edge of consciousness, we're aware of it and can make use of that information. Do we call it a pheromone? And here, a recent book came out, Dick Doty, who's in the field, a book called The Great Pheromone Myth. He makes no bones about where he's going with this. He says there's no, oh, come on, this is Congressman Weiner's territory, please. Here, please. Congressman Weiner to perfumery, please.
He may have been hacked.
There's some topics you just can't avoid. The jokes write themselves. So, a pheromone, the concept originated in 1959 with insects, and the idea was that there was one or a couple of molecules, very specific, that would have a very specific behavioral response. So you put one of these two molecules in front of a male wasp, and he'll try to copulate with whatever smells like that. So very...
How do you know that the wasp is copulating exactly?
Oh, you can see it.
Really?
Good thing. And you can even put in a static object, and they will try to copulate with.
Okay. All right.
Well, which is
Question answered.
And evolution, of course, an orchid will figure out a way to put those two molecules up and get all these horny male wasps to land in hopes of copulating. And in fact, all it will do is pollinate the orchid and leave frustrated. So it's a sneaky system. But the pheromone concept involves very, very specific signals and very specific reaction, and it's got to be automatic. It's got to be hardwired into the creature so that you put that odor in front of the male wasp and bingo, response. With humans, every time somebody's claimed that there's a human sex pheromone usually or some other pheromone, it's always a big mixture of things, not a single molecule. It's, the response is not automatic like the wasp. It always depends on learning and context. And I think at this point, the pheromone concept scientifically just doesn't do any more work, and we ought to give it up.
Leslie?
Well, I think if you're going to be very semantic about it and require that you can paint human sweat onto a lamppost and have someone be sexually aroused, then that doesn't work because humans are more complex than insects. However,
hey, wait a minute,
I think it meets many of the substances in that man's armpit meet many of the criteria of pheromones. So it's produced by a member of one species and it influences the biology of another member of the same species. So you scrape that stuff off of his armpit. There's really good science suggesting it affects mood in women. It can, so it's affecting mood and hormone
Nobody's
status.
ever been able to point to a single molecule.
Only
Not
because,
even 3 or 4
only because
molecules.
it's a bit of a fringe field. So we have, I think there aren't enough people working on the chemistry of dissecting what's in the sweat. So the absence of the data doesn't mean it doesn't exist, I would argue.
No, but just every time there's a human experiment like that, they say, well, it's kind of like a pheromone, except we have to stretch the definition a little this way. And then somebody else has an experiment where it almost fits the definition, we have to stretch it that way. So now you've got a kind of Sanzabel pants version of a theory that fits everything and nothing. So, but I buy it. I mean, I believe what he's sweating can have those effects. I believe in strippers.
And I also
believe. It's not a pheromone.
It's ludicrous to say.
Consuelo, do you have an opinion on this?
Come on, bug girl.
I think you can argue both ways. I think Leslie's right in the sense we don't know a lot about smell yet. The science is relatively new. And yes, nobody has been able to point out that, pheromones, like the two molecules, not the pheromones are our two molecules, it can be a complex, a little bit depending on the insect. But we haven't found that. And I think you have to stretch a little bit the concept of pheromones to fit humans. But I think, there is no doubt that there are things that are attractive to
That man's armpit says a lot. That's all I'm going to say.
We can talk about chemical signals, and I think we find a lot of agreement there. I mean, we're communicating things, or there's information coming, we're giving off that is biologically important. It may have had a role in evolution too, but I just think the pheromone thing just doesn't. You know what it reminds me of? Back in the from 1800s to 1920s, people used to talk about instinct in animal behavior. There was an instinct for mothering, there was an instinct for fleeing from predators, instinct for this, instinct for that. If you do a Google Ngram search of the word instinct, it goes up like this to 1920 and then plunges. Because in the 1920s, people just said, either there's 500,000 different instincts, or we've stretched this concept beyond any utility at all. And I think we've peaked with pheromone, and we're going to see it fall off. I think the research is going to keep going. We're going to find out great new stuff about Disco Boy here, but I think that as a concept, it's done.
But I think one thing that we're going to become much better is to understand the information content of smell, which we don't know, right? So, for the stuff that we're doing with disease, for example, because we think about few compounds, but the body's releasing 500 molecules, 600 molecules that, like Leslie said, you have a combination of molecules. They smell of A and B. It's not A and B anymore. It's C. So once we understand the information content, then we understand much more how a lot of the things that we think is not scientific, in a sense, like you're not responding to this because, right?
I think the stimulus is real. I think the response is real. It's just that it doesn't make sense to call it that. The other thing is, even if we map out the armpit essence that's having this effect on the girls in the club. We still haven't had, that's not an explanation for everything, because so much of this involves interpretation and context. Even in mice, for example, who prefer to mate with mice that smell like their mother. If you perfume the mother with Chanel, and then give the mice a choice later when they're sexually mature of who to mate with, they'll prefer mating with a Chanel-scented female. So there's no evolution. What's the pheromone? Pheromone at that point doesn't do any work for us.
Leslie, final thought before we break out the cards?
I guess I think that the pheromone deniers among us are setting humans aside from all other animals. So I think it would seem unusual to me that humans have evolved past the point where we're not using social signals. So I continue to believe that we're using those signals.
Okay, you guys can take it outside afterwards. All right, so let's try the scent test, shall we? All right, take out your envelopes. And we've got a couple of doozies for you. That man's armpit has nothing to do with it, though.
Number 1 is so gross it has to be wrapped in plastic.
There's a reason why number 1 is wrapped in plastic. I'll let you decide for yourself. Take it out of the plastic. Save the plastic, though, because you're going to put it in. There's a little removal tab right here that'll help you lower left.
This is horrible.
Are people starting to cough? Go ahead, smell.
My favorite cheese.
I can hear you smelling it.
Oh, grow up. Come on, that's good.
Okay, anybody want to shout out some answers to guess what it is? Brie? Swiss. Swiss? Smelly feet. Oh, Gruyere. I can never say that. It's like, what?
Vomit, I agree.
Vomit.
Vomit is a good one.
Vomit is a good one. What? Dirty?
Oh, durian.
Durian. Sour milk. I see your hand. Okay. So you don't have to scratch. Now you can put this back in. If you like the smell of it, you can take it home. And we have to put it back in the baggie because there will be others. This is a classic scent. Sissel, I want you to talk about this, and then I will reveal what the answer is.
So this is one of the molecules we found in David Beckham's Adidas shoes.
David Beckham's Adidas, that's what this scent is.
And the same smell molecule we found in several Swiss cheeses. So you are all right.
Swiss cheese, very good. So it's a
and
chemical.
And again, back to my experiments at Harvard was, putting connection between human body and the cheese.
It has a name, though. It's called an isovaleric acid, right? And it's the same molecule as on human feet, smelly feet, and on cheese.
And very attractive to mosquitoes.
Mosquitoes
as well.
love it. So it's a major thing that.
Okay, so we have to clean our feet and our mosquitoes won't come around. Is that it?
Yes.
Why do you think? What's the theory? Why are mosquitoes loving that?
Well, the girl mosquitoes need a blood meal. They prefer a human blood meal, and so the best thing is to learn to recognize the unique scent of a human, which is uniquely.
So you just open your
acid.
shoes when you are mosquitoes. You just take
But they're
out your
chemical
Think we put dirty socks and they would come.
Dirty socks,
We're
they'll
fighting
come?
over Avery's dirty
Yeah,
socks.
getting his socks
Can't wait at
afterwards,
the end.
They were backstage fighting over Avery's socks.
Yes.
That may be why he was so riled up when he came out here. Okay, let's try card number 2, shall we?
I don't like that at all, actually. Do you?
It's lovely.
Do you like it?
Guesses?
I don't think it smells like that. At least the ones I.
What? Licorice.
I don't think it smells like
Cassis?
Anise.
Anise.
Bouillon, like instant.
Fennel. I got a fennel. I got another fennel.
Yeah.
What?
I don't eat those.
Me neither. But I know the smell.
Celery.
And a lot of people, when they're sick, they drink it. It's supposed to kind of.
Antibiotic properties.
Yeah, you.
I'm a vegetarian.
Dill.
Dill.
I got a dill. Very interesting.
Good.
Okay, so what this is the smell of chicken soup. Kind of.
Chicken soup.
What do you think, Avery?
I think a lot of the
Instant chicken soup.
people are picking up on the culinary spices. Someone said anise, and it's that those are in
And dill.
in thyme and dill. Yeah, so it's a common essential oil in culinary spices.
So talk about memory triggers and things like chicken soup.
I don't know.
Your grandma's.
Did anybody go back in time with this one? One hand. Huh?
One hand.
Uncle Fester in the back
three,
there. Okay. It's tough. Sometimes we get the specific emotional recalls, and other times not. I don't want to overplay that. It's an emotional sense, but I don't think it's entirely an emotional sense. Some people claim that smell is all about emotion all the time, and it's also about cognition. Every time that you're trying to locate a smell, if you're trying to decide if it's too strong or too weak, the cologne you're putting on, if you're smelling a shampoo in the CVS aisle and wondering if your spouse will like it, or if it smells like an anti-dandruff shampoo or more like a, fancy body wash that'll attract the other sex. Those are all cognitive things you're doing. Those are all thinking process kind of things. Memory, comparison, analysis. And so I think it's easy to overdo the emotion. Plus, there's an entire industry devoted to making fragrances that appeal to people at large.
Right.
And if we try to appeal to one private emotional scenario, you're not going to capture much of the market.
Well, I have a friend who's an environmentalist, and she says the scent of clean is no scent because it shouldn't smell like lemon or pine, which are our artificial scents anyways. All right, let's pull out card number 3, shall we? Laundry? I got a laundry. Grandma's perfume. Bamboo? Shampoo. Men's deodorant. Fabric softener.
How many people smell absolutely nothing?
How many people, this is a scent that not everyone can smell. Who smells nothing? Really? Interesting. Scent invisible.
Don't worry,
smell
it's
it.
perfectly normal.
So Leslie, tell us, this is the scent of musk.
So this is galaxolide. And the answer is you guys are incredibly sophisticated smellers because it smells like shampoo and soap because this is a major ingredient that every manufacturer puts. We've learned to associate this smell with clean. So we've been doing a learning experiment. And what's cool is I saw a lot of hands of people who smell nothing. And so this is a very common condition called specific anosmia. So you did well with having a reaction to card 1 and card 2, but you're unable to detect this because you're genetically missing some of the 400 little circles that I drew earlier. So it's most likely...
Is it most likely this that you would be...
Smell disabled.
It's a very common one.
You're smell disabled.
It's extremely common that it is extremely common.
We like to call it smell challenged, okay?
Smell challenged.
Okay. Okay.
What it actually is, it's very much like, it's the olfactory version of the color vision anomaly. that
Exactly.
Leslie's talking about. So you've got a basically okay odor perception, and then you've got one notch kind of missing, where it's like you can't hear one frequency. So your sense of smell is normal, but you've got this one notch. That's why it's called specific.
Is that why there's
anosmia.
that one guy at the party who's wearing way too much cologne because he can't smell it?
No, it's because he's hot.
Who's hot in there?
Okay,
What are the other, is this a common scent that people can't smell, Leslie?
So my lab has done work on this, and Avery has done classic work showing it's an extremely common specific anosmia. So depending on which one you test, 5, 10, 20% of random people pulled out of an audience or on a subway train cannot detect these. And
What percentage, sir?
it really depends on the scent. It depends how you do the experiments. But let's say blanket 10%, 1 in 10 people can't smell these.
Oh, at least.
We had a
least,
good sprinkling of hands here.
and so I think some of you weren't honest because it should be 10% of you not being able to smell anything. And it's helping us track down the inner workings of how the nose works because we can use these as clues to figure out if you can't smell card number 3, then if you go into the genes, into the DNA, what's missing? It helps us begin to associate the 400 receptors with scents.
And what they can sense and what they can't.
Exactly.
And what's another common scent that is smell blind?
Well, my favorite one is androstenone and androstadienone. The stuff that was leaking out of that guy's armpit is the male-derived odor. We found the gene called OR7D4, and about 15% of New Yorkers have a broken gene, and so they perceive the sweaty armpit smell as much more pleasant than people who are intact genetically.
So maybe Avery's like Freud and he just can't smell the pheromone. That's the
Listen,
problem.
in my case, you know, I have people lining up for the guys, you know. There's, at MIT, there was a woman that fell in love with guy number 9, and she came every morning and kissing the wall up and down, back and forth. In Korea, an old man come up and say, can you give me half a liter of guy number 2? I mean, this is the first time since the First World War I can smell human body again. You know?
Really?
The last time I smelled it was the Japanese-Korean War, and this guy was 97. He was crying, so it's something there. I absolutely support Leslie, and I have another project where I have all these sweaty guys on pages, and some people sleep with these books, you know, so there must be something
You
in
have
the
a
air.
very interesting life, I gotta say. All right, so let's go to card number 4. Open it up.
Yeah.
Give it a smell. Nice sniff. Funeral? Excuse me. Say again? Stargazer lilies. That is what it smells like.
Yeah.
Lilac. I got a lilac.
Lilac. It's very
What?
hard to get.
Car tire? Did you get the right card? Is this 4? Oh, it's so beautiful. Consuelo, tell us what we're smelling.
Oh, this is a flower of you.
It's a flower, so this is another way, I would say, that plants call up insects to do their work for them. So flowers
Gives off smell.
They smell, so they reproduce sexually, so they have to find a way, so they can't move, right? So they have to find a way to somebody to transport the pollen. So what they do, they have these beautiful smells that attract the pollinators to carry their nectar to another plant. So that's a great way that plants have co-opted others to do their jobs since they can't move. So.
Yes.
This is a specific scent of a flower that's a rare flower found in Tahiti. It's called the tiari. Tiari. And it's a lot like a stargazer lily. I agree with you. So
I think what's interesting about that is if somebody shouted out car tire, that kind of...
And the first person said funeral.
Well,
I guess you'd have lilies at a
that's
funeral.
a good one. But the car tire aspect of it goes back to something I was saying about narcissus reminding me of tennis balls. There's a set of compounds called indoles, which have a kind of stinky note, but which are also at the heart of certain of those heavy floral scents. And so that's probably what this person out there, I can see, was picking up on, that I pick up on. I find that it overwhelms the floral part of the composition. For me, it's a little much.
A little much, yeah. So Consuelo, tell us about how plants show sort of animal-like behaviors with their noses.
So we'll see a video here in a little bit, but so I think we all accept that insects can smell, mammals can smell, but I think people have a little bit of a hard time thinking how plants could do the same. So the little plant, the yellow vine here, is a parasitic plant, so they don't have roots, they don't have leaves, so they have to attach to a plant to acquire resources. So what this plant does is it smells the host plant, and it will move into this behavior, like the circumvention behavior, towards the tomato plant.
It's a parasitic plant.
It's a parasitic plant. So they will attach to that plant and connect to the vascular system and take the resources out of it.
So it's sucking the blood.
It's sucking the blood,
What,
exactly.
It's called a daughter plant?
It's called the daughter plant. So here, just for you to see, this is a cascuda with no host nearby, so there is no plants they can attach to. And you see the behavior is very different, right? You don't see any directional behavior. So you see this more random behavior, right? And this I use to say, if they don't find a host, they will die. And
It's sad.
It's very sad.
It's the death of the daughter.
So they try very hard to the very last bitter end to find.
It's tragic. Oh.
And they smell the plant.
That's just...
And they smell the tomato.
Right, they smell the tomato. So this is to show how we can put the smell on this rubber scepter, and we enclose the tomato, and you see how they will grow to the smell now.
Oh, this is just cruel. Cruelty to plants. I start a campaign. So that thing smells like a tomato.
That smells like a tomato. So we take the smell of tomato, put in this little release device, and they try to connect to it. And the sad thing, actually, is that once they take a direction, they cannot go back.
Oh.
So they really do. I felt really horrible.
Are you telling me that? Are you telling me that plants were killed in the making of that video?
So in the lab, we actually had this slide that we show that we'd never let the cascute attach to the plant, so no tomatoes are harmed in our experiments.
But let's move on from plants to humans. What I found fascinating was this idea that disease has a smell, and that specifically malaria has a smell.
Right. So we actually start doing this in plants, and we show that when plants are being attacked by pathogens, they change their smell, and seem like the virus in this case was manipulating the plant to attract the vectors that transmit the disease. So we show that in plants, and we went to look at malaria, and we found that we're doing this in mice system, and we found that the malaria is changing the odors of the mice. So you can look at a healthy mouse and an infected mouse, and we can see the differences. But even more than that, what we see is that when the transmissible stage of the malaria is present, they produce a different smell that attracts the mosquitoes that transmit malaria.
Interesting. And yet there are also early stages of cancer that can be detected by smell?
So the science on this is still sort of science fiction, but I'm sort of optimistic that eventually the chemistry of this will get better. So the idea is that when you're sick, you smell different, just as has been shown for malaria. So just when you go to the airport and they swab your baggage and put it into a machine to read for traces of bombs, that we can eventually get a signature of what a normal healthy person smells like, and then train an electronic nose to tell the difference between the signature of a healthy person versus a cancer patient. So the data on that is they've had a few anecdotes of a woman whose dog licked her leg, and that woman was later found to have metastatic melanoma. There at that point, and then she went to. There's been a replication that's a little bit better. So there's been a study with 6 dogs sniffing the urine of subjects who either were normal or suffering from bladder cancer. The dogs do better than chance, but I still wouldn't rely on this as a way to figure out if you are affected.
But Leslie, isn't there a big difference between the two things you're talking about? If I understand what Consuelo is saying, is that the malaria parasite itself is kind of changing the host odor in order to attract mosquitoes to spread itself to other humans. So it's sort of a deliberate re-engineering of your body odor. Whereas cancer is not communicable, presumably.
No,
so
I think
any
it's just
change in smell wouldn't be.
It's just the idea that the scents that a human produces are very dependent on internal state. So if you eat a huge garlic sandwich, you will give off a garlicky scent. So if you're suffering, it used to be used in the last century for diagnosis. So certain diabetic diseases, you give off scents that are perceptible, and so people used to sniff the patients and have a good idea of that they were suffering from this or that metabolic disorder.
Because whatever the metabolism is doing to sort of change your body chemistry.
Exactly.
So I think one thing that we're going to have to understand, and like Leslie said, I think the science will have to progress way more than it is right now, is that maybe you can go back and see what your body is producing and understand what's happening to your body. So let's say if you have liver disease, you might produce some kind of scent. So it's not necessarily a manipulation thing, it's just how the change on the changes that are being caused by the disease are affecting the way you transpire.
Well, I know there are cases.
Can I just interject? I did a story years ago for Good Morning America about a dog who would repeatedly wake his owner every time he was having a cardiac event. And they believed that the dog was smelling something. And at least that's what, all the experts at the time were saying. And then, of course, the dog got cancer, and the man was able to save the dog's life. But repeatedly, the dog would wake the owner in the middle of the night. The wife would call 911, and the man would be having an episode. So whether or not that's true is an anecdotal case, but it was fascinating at the time.
I think dogs obviously they're very sensory animals. They have very acute senses of smell, but I don't think it's really a practical solution for medical diagnosis. I think that the dog experiments.
Let's just put lab coats on them and
the dog experiments tell you that there's something going on, that they're above chance able to distinguish different people and distinguish a given person when they're ill or healthy, but the point is to figure out what's a legitimate biomarker of a particular disease, and then just as the TSA has figured out a way to build machines to get a signature of an explosive, build a machine to get a signature of a particular disease state, and that would be useful because the machine doesn't get cancer. The machine
are they looking at a chemical signature when they're looking at an explosive? Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So one thing I was going to say about this is that there's this very complex set of signals that you're sending, right? So you're producing a lot of odors that are not necessarily related to the disease. So one issue is how to find the patterns in the specific biomarkers that you can use to do that. So,
but how do you find that pattern?
So there's statistical ways to look through the mess, right? So like I said, when we collect volatiles from a mouse, we're getting 180 compounds, right? So I'm looking at 180 compounds every day, 24 hours a day. That's very complex, but then you use ways to do statistical analysis to see what's different about a healthy and an infected individual. And then from that, what is reliable. And that is the challenge, how to get to that, to get what Leslie's saying, to get to the biomarkers. Because I think the beauty of this is that one problem with diseases that we have is the asymptomatic individuals, is the ones that are walking around and they look healthy, right? With malaria, that's very much the problem.
Right.
Because it's very easy to diagnose somebody in this acute phase of the disease. It's obvious they have malaria.
And so a human can smell the malarial smell?
Well, it's not a human. No, I wouldn't say.
A chemist.
A chemist could smell.
A chemist with a very good machine
can smell the.
But not like oh my God, you have malaria.
No.
Yeah. So Leslie, let me make sure I get this right, because you got me really excited now. So
good.
There's an ovulatory.
Avery, you look very excited right now.
there's an ovulatory smell signal given off by women, and with an electronic nose sensitive enough and tuned to that,
we could
so I could have a pocket ovulometer to
Exactly.
take with me to bars. Is that what you're telling me?
Yes, that's exactly right.
I think we should set up a business.
I thought that's
You're
what you
an
were saying.
entrepreneur
I thought
at
that's
heart,
what you were
Avery,
saying.
I can tell. So Avery, speaking of selling things, you, in your book, The Nose Knows, talks about the zombies at the mall, right? And how, in an effort to sell you things, companies have been manipulating our noses for a while.
Scent marketing's been around as a concept for about 7,500 years, but it's kind of taking off now because people are realizing, number one, there's a technology available, so you can go into a store and have kind of scented zones in different areas of the store. And we've also gotten a lot more sophisticated about the sort of behavioral measurements we can take. So for instance, you were talking about the clothes and clothing. Study in one store put a feminine fragrance, a kind of soft floral smell. This was a college clothing store next to a college campus. With the feminine floral odor, sale of women's products went up, sale of men's products went down. Significant. Let me talk about, instead of average $25 purchase, up to $50. Then they put a more masculine scent in, equally nice scent, but a little more, you just tell it was more masculine. You got to reverse. Men's wear sales went up, women's wear sales went down. So what are you doing? You're not controlling anybody's mind, although there's always, there are like truthers, birthers, and sniffers. I don't know what there are out there. There's always a conspiracy theory somewhere. But you're kind of setting the context for the people the shoppers to interpret what's going on. It's been shown that a smell can activate what psychologists call semantic networks. So the smell of a cleaning fluid, you know, a Windex or a Comet cleanser, will get, you put that smell in the air and you hand people a cracker snack to eat, and then you come back and you notice the people who have the clean smell in the air tend to be wiping the crumbs off the table and stuff like that, as opposed to people that don't have any. So you haven't told them to do anything, you're not, you know, causing them to have a behavior, but you've got them thinking clean at some level.
But you are, in a way, causing them to behave in a certain way.
Well, no more than by showing you an advertisement, playing you a jingle. That's what advertising does.
The real estate agents will tell you that if you're trying to sell your home, bake a pie
But
before
if
you
put
sell your
those-
house, right? I mean, everyone said. Yeah.
But if you put those smells, let's say in India, the reaction will be completely different. So I think we are dealing here with a very white Caucasian kind of approach to the definition of bad and good and clean and not clean. And I think that's a fundamental discussion that has to be taken. You know, what justify for this kind of definition? We're operating after old rules here. And we are living in a world where the definition of cleaning up means different. And I think the only way we can move on there is to get people access to, let's say, bacteria and smell molecules and see them in different contexts than necessarily manipulating to sell and to behave different. I think it's, yeah.
We have been manipulating our food for a long time, right?
Yes,
So
exactly.
all the artificial smells
Absolutely.
that we have place on food that we think we're eating something that we're not eating.
Exactly,
right?
like with this chicken soup, you know, like,
Right.
okay, instant chicken soup, some people have a relation to it, some not, you know.
Right.
In fact, we've probably been manipulating ourselves over evolutionary time. One of the arguments I make against, you know, the Freudians who say we can't smell anymore, I'll grant that we're not very good at smelling stuff at a distance. So if we go hunting on the Serengeti Plain, I'm not going to be able to smell the gazelle, you know, a half mile upwind.
Yes.
But once we bag the gazelle with the aid of our trusty hunting dogs and bring him back, we can season the hell out of it in the stew pot. And I think that's what we've really evolved for. We're very good at that kind of close-in smelling. It's called retronasal, the kind of smell that comes up the back of your throat and out your nose. It reverses. And we're very good at picking up and savoring those things. And I think since we've been cooking probably for some estimates as much as 2 million years,
Who are we?
hominids, since we early ancestors came out, have been cooking and using spices which create whole new flavors and fermenting alcohol, fermented milk, cheese, come back to cheese again. All these products didn't exist before, and now they're influencing possibly our genetics. I don't know if that's plausible to you. But
I'm fishing here, but tell me a little bit about the relationship between smell and taste, because you know there are those who lose a sense of smell and have a difficulty with taste, et cetera.
I've been sort of struck in our work that we encounter lots of people who believe they have a really strong, incredibly compelling sense of smell, but actually are smell blind. So I'm sort of amazed that when at birth you test children for hearing and you test children for vision, but nobody really tests for the sense of smell. Which is sort of,
Can you though test for a sense of smell? Can you put someone in a booth?
Well, the things that we've been doing today, it's things like this that are a substrate for smell testing. But it's amazing how I think the sense of smell is really important. It is. I mean, to answer your question, of course, if you hold your nose and try to eat something, the food has no real flavor because you're no longer using the retronasal pathway.
You're going to try that later, aren't you? Hold your nose and try.
So the sense of smell is crucial for our enjoyment of food and everything else. But it is amazing how many people are. We would never have to be told.
But why is it crucial? How is it tied in? Because you would think your taste buds are independent, and yet.
But they're not. So the tongue collaborates with the nose to bind together the tastes which hit the tongue and the smell molecules which hit the nose combine in the brain to give you the full texture. So lemon, if you just taste a lemon, if you hold the nose, you get nothing. You just get a weak sour. If you just smell a lemon, you don't get the perception from the tongue of sour. You have to do these things together.
So sorry. But I think what is fundamentally missing is education. I think that smell and chemistry and the nose should be part of curriculum in primary school. The earlier you can train kids to use the nose consciously, the better future you have. And you don't have any more, you know, the issues of, okay, the rose manipulated me to buy more jeans than the other who didn't have a rose.
Does it break down, though,
really
in gender? Because
fundamental here.
Maybe it's just anecdotal, but it seems to me that women are better at smell, because my husband is sort of smell blind. I'm like, you can't smell that? Come on.
Time after time, it's one of the most reliable
kids.
Gender-specific results in psychology.
Yes,
Women are better at detecting lower levels of smell, and especially at naming them, which goes with a higher verbal score in a lot of these cases. So, but again, that's a team average, right? So women have the average reliably from study to study, but any one guy might outdo any particular woman, or vice versa. But when it comes back to the smell testing, that's a fascinating thing. There are a few smell tests on the market. I think it was only in 2006 that the FDA approved the first smell test for clinical use, which is kind of weird when you think about it. They're basically scratch and sniff tests that ask you to identify, smell this, is it A, B, C, or D?
Right, but in our example, we gave 4 different smells, and people came up with vastly different answers for each of them.
That's a difficult task.
Yeah, but if you had it in school from the age of 0, the world will look different. I'm sorry. If you had ABC 1, 2, 3, and molecule 1, 2, 3, or whatever you call it, absolutely, you have a different kind of humanity on the planet Earth. I'm sorry. I work with kids, and they are 0 to 12, and the result of the experiment I do is like amazing, breathtaking, and it's amazing tolerance, and that's beyond hedonic, it's beyond what any average grown-up will ever dare to do, and also the ability to express to the respective smell is amazing.
Well, Avery did say that women are better at, do we know why women are better at identifying smell?
I think there's 2 things. There's, aside from using words to describe a scent, just sensitivity biologically, as Avery said, is a little higher in women.
So describing a scent, I mean, Sissel, I know this is another hot topic for you, because in your view, culturally, there are far more words to describe colors than there are scents.
Yes, and having access to amazing knowledge through the industry, I'm able, or others with me, able to reproduce reality endlessly. So was also try to make systems out of smell, also try to evoke speaking about smell. I think that's essential here in judgment and decision-making towards certain smells. Like, so far, we communicate smell, it's bad or good, and the rest are metaphors. We can render up to 10,000 smells, and we communicate in 2 words. We have done certain research with the anthropology linguists and found fantastic, terminologies for the purpose to communicate direct smells in a certain context. And on behalf of that research, we have done certain site-specific work and challenging people to express intuitive, terms for exactly those
So you've actually come
smells.
up with some of these terms. So you want to go over some of them with us?
Not necessarily, but
Come on.
come on.
The
No,
smell of the countryside. We call that sort of the mossy, peaty, countryside-y smell. What do you call
again, to explain how those systems occur is really to reproduce certain smells, bring it out to the people, and ask them, please, make an attempt to express a word in relation to that smell. And then compare the different words that were expressed to exact that smell and try to see if there is similarity in that specific expression. And some of the words, like a project I did in Mexico City, that happened. And ozone is the smell of the countryside, but more specifically what it is, and and others.
And what about the smell of dirty fish? Because that's kind of universal, like smelly fish smell.
That was also a Mexico project. So again, it's project-based. I don't pretend to make Esperanto for the nose, and it's really an attempt to see, can one challenge to express smell beyond it smells good or smells bad, and what happened when a smell became interesting. I think it's a different starting point, they're saying bad and good. Yeah.
Well, I have to say, whenever I order wine and the sommelier comes by and describes, nutty, fruity, peaty, blah, I have no idea what he's talking about.
You can learn that, though. It's entirely learnable. And the way you would learn the varietal characters of wines is the same way perfumers learn how learn their trade. You get shown an example, like an oaky Chardonnay versus a non-oaky Chardonnay. You smell, you taste, and you remember. And you create in your mind a unique kind of mental hook for that flavor, that aroma. And then you learn the lychee nut flavor that's in a Gewürztraminer wine. So you smell, you taste, you learn it, and then you've got that. And so one by one you add it up, and then you can do these amazing feats of saying, oh, well, this is a Bordeaux, and it's well aged, and then you can guess where it's from and that
But
kind of
my
thing.
sense is, I don't know if you guys agree with me, that the words really are inadequate. So if you read the descriptions of wines, once you read 10 descriptions, you've sort of exhausted all the words. But you can parse the wines into a very large number. I mean, the wines are all distinct. And you mentioned the number 10,000, which there's a great passage in your book, Avery, about the myth of, you read about the sense of smell, this widely repeated lie that humans can smell 10,000 odors. I don't know who made that up. It's just wrong. We don't know how many odors there are on Earth. Moreover, we don't know how many we can smell. So I said with 3 receptors, you can see 10 million colors. So with 400, there should be at least the potential
Nobody's
to
ever
sense.
counted the number of smells.
Yeah,
I'm not
that
sure how you
hasn't
go
been done. That
about
would
it.
be a good life. We can take all of you guys, we can go around and try to start cataloging smells, but it will exceed 10,000.
Exponential number, obviously. You know, I detected a smile across your face, Avery, when Leslie admitted that she'd read your book. It was really imperceptible.
I read it on the beach. It was a good read.
How much is that? $10 for the mention? Actually, there was one thing I was going to ask Sissel about, though. The whole idea that you can kind of make progress by refining the vocabulary. It comes back to what you were talking about, too, Leslie. A fellow named Dennis Dutton, he just died recently, but he was a kind of philosopher of art, ran the Arts and Science Daily, Arts and Letters Daily website. He wrote a book called The Art Instinct, where he talked about kind of what is it deep in our biology that causes us to do art, since people have been doing art since drawing bison and mammoths on the cave walls and so forth. And he talks about olfactory art and whether it's even possible, and he denied that it was possible. I thought it was interesting. He says, not that we dismiss smell, or that we don't like it, or, because obviously we spend a lot of money to smell good. It's not that it's a lower sense. We're very good at it, and it's very cognitive. This all warmed my heart. But he said it was because we don't have a way to arrange smells in an organized fashion, like we can arrange sounds in musical sequences,
and colors.
pitch.
Just yesterday, I was at the museum with my children. We have warm colors. We have
And you've got a rainbow. You've got a sequence.
dark, light.
But we don't have a way of. There's no arrangement for smells. And he said that's the limit. That's the big stumbling block. That without that, you can't create the things in art that you have, like rhyme, rhythm, narrative, and so forth. And that's where it's going to.
But all this can't, I think has to be changed in a different way. And I think we have to try with what we have to our disposal, and that means we have newborn human beings that maybe can approach the nose from a different perspective than we ourselves did. And I believe there, I've done it with my daughter. I see another human being that I am myself, and I absolutely believe that is possible.
How would you characterize, Avery, the different scents, though? I mean, we kind of did 4 of them here. We have a floral, we have a, floral fragrant, we have a sharp pungent, we have, how would you?
People have been trying to do this for hundreds of years. In fact, the first organized system to organize smell was Linnaeus, who also did the organizing system for biology and the species and genus. His system was a little goofy. He was sort of an aromatherapist of the 18th century. He was looking for a way to find, all medicines in his time were botanical, or botanically derived, and he figured that the more effective medications would be the smellier plants, and that the type of plant, if a plant smelled spicy, it would be good for perking you up and good for depression and so forth. So based on that, he made an arrangement of smells and used it as kind of a drug hunter's botanical guide. So it was useless it wasn't a general theory of smell. In perfumery today, we have these maps and hierarchies. You kind of do genealogies of perfumes. From Jiki came this one, when came this one, and today we have Calvin Klein and so forth. You can make
the genealogy of perfumes. Let me ask you a question. In perfumes, how much of that scent is chemical, and how much of it is derived from the rare Tahitian plant that we smell?
First of all, everything's a chemical. How much of it is a synthetic? How much of it is essential oil? Can vary. It's a matter of cost, by and large.
Essential oils being more expensive?
Expensive, rare, and subject to variations on
and
weather.
And do they correlate to price? So if I'm paying more for my Chanel No. 5, is there more of an essential oil?
You pay for what you get in perfume, yeah.
You do?
Yeah.
But mostly you pay for the bottle, not what is inside.
Right.
it's a lot of bad message in bad bottles, and I try to maybe put some, focus on the content of the bottle and playfully understand what smell can do by challenging kids to speak about and maybe be the future's criticers of perfumes and the like, and with a completely different intention. I think it's necessary.
Now, Consuelo talks about the importance of smell for plants, but Leslie, talk a little bit about the importance of smell for animals.
It's crucial. So animals, there's a lot of animals that are nocturnal, and so they're using their eyes is not very useful for finding food. So for nocturnal animals, obviously, like moths that mate, they need to have a sense of smell for the male moth to find the female moth for mating. Animals like our beloved rats and mice that live in New York are guided almost entirely by their sense of smell. And so they're very good at this.
With the moths, not only they use the smell to find mates, but actually to decide where to lay their eggs.
Where to lay their eggs.
Right, so if you have...
And how does a moth smell?
Through the antenna.
Yeah, right. I love the answers to the questions that I've been asking you today. It occurs to me, I actually did another story for 2020 about dogs that were trained to smell out cash, for drug runners and whatever, and they would go and kind of like a bomb detecting, and then they would sit. And how do they train the dog-sniffing dogs to do that?
Dogs have, they have great powers of attention and memory, so it's obviously, you give them a treat, and so they attend very much to the signal, and so just by the power of association, they figure, I'm going to get this really delicious piece of lamb lung if I figure out what's different about this versus that.
And so does currency have a singular smell,
well, everything,
or do liras smell different than dollars?
Everything smells.
Everything has a smell. Everything in this room has a smell, and so certainly the dog can learn the specific pattern that differs between money versus some other stimulus.
We are closing in about 3 minutes left on the panel, so I want to just give everybody a last licks, as they say in baseball. And why don't we start? Consuelo, we'll start with you.
Oh wow, I think for me the thing that amaze me every time is the information content that smell can give you. It's just, every time we explore a system, we found something that we didn't expect. And it's, I think smell is, I'm biased obviously, but I think smell is really directing a lot of the ecology in the systems, in plants, in humans, in animals. So I think it's just a world out there to be explored. And
so smell is packed with data. That's a good closing thought. Okay, Sissel?
Yeah, there's a whole world to smell, a whole world to educate. And I don't think it's a question of its stench or not. I think it's a question of thinking.
It's a question of
thinking.
Thinking. So it's not whether it's a stench or a good smell or bad smell.
Nothing stinks.
Okay, good. Avery?
I'm really looking forward to the next few years of research on brain imaging and when people are experiencing smells and thinking about them. I think we're on the verge of learning a lot about how we process odor information, and my hunch is that we're going to learn things that will enable us to play with the sense of smell and make it a lot more. We'll have technologies that will involve us a lot more in smell. If it's smell-o-vision or whatever, it's going to be something we can manipulate and actively manipulate more than we've been able to.
And how will smell come out on the internet? Were you working on that? Who's working on that? Yeah. So how does that happen?
That was a device plugged into your USB port, and it would spritz out little different combinations of odors.
Print it out?
Spritz out.
Spritz out.
With a little
how does it spritz it out?
You take a little plate with electronics on top and little wells, each containing a different odor, and you can activate any one or a number of them in combinations and put an odor out. That was the idea back then.
Is there a prototype for this?
There was, and it worked, and it was great, and the company went bust because it was a kind of dot-com thing, unfortunately.
That's too bad. I can't tell you how many cooking segments I've done where it smells so good, and I say, I wish you could smell this at home. If only we had smell-o-vision. Leslie, closing thoughts.
So it's the science of smell is really only, it's a couple of decades young, like modern molecular biology of smell, and it used to be that you were viewed as a complete freak if you worked on smell, but it's heartening to see that the interest in this science is increasing, and it's reaching through to the study of malaria, to human health, so it's kind of an exciting time to be in science and doing science of smell.
And it's an exciting time to be here at the World Science Festival. Thank you all so much for sitting so patiently through all this, for their fabulous insights.